My sister showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning with nothing but a plastic grocery bag and a bruise spreading across her left cheekbone like a storm cloud that hadn't finished forming. She didn't ring the bell. She just stood there on my front porch in the Georgia heat, holding that bag against her chest like it was the last thing she owned in the world. Which, it turned out, it nearly was. I hadn't seen Gloria in almost 2 years, not because I didn't love her, because Tanisha wouldn't allow it. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I read every single one. My name is Raymond. I'm 67 years old, retired from 22 years with the Fulton County Sheriff's Department. And for most of my adult life, I believed the law was the only tool a man needed to solve his problems. I don't entirely believe that anymore. This is the story that changed my mind. Gloria is my little sister. 59 years old, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who apologizes to furniture when she bumps into it. She raised her son Derek alone after his father walked out, working double shifts at a hospital laundry for 15 years to keep that boy fed, clothed, and in school. She bought a small house on Maple Creek Drive in Decatur with a government assistance program and 20 years of disciplined saving. 3 bedrooms, a garden in the back, blue shutters she painted herself one summer. That house was everything to her. Then Derek married Tamisha. I never trusted Tanisha Okafor from the first Sunday she sat at our family table. There was something calculating behind her smile, the way she cataloged the room, quietly taking inventory. But Derek was in love and Gloria was grateful her son had found someone. So I kept my opinion to myself. I was good at that. For a while, Tanisha moved into Gloria's house 6 months after the wedding. She brought her mother, Yvonne, without asking. Then she brought her younger brother, Deshaun, who was 25, unemployed, and apparently permanent. 3 adults who contributed nothing, consumed everything, and slowly, methodically dismantled my sister's life from the inside. What Tanisha did was surgical. First, she convinced Derek that Gloria was bad with money, that the bills were piling up because of his mother's incompetence. Then she positioned herself as the solution, taking over the finances to help. Within 8 months, Gloria's name was still on the mortgage, but she hadn't seen her own bank statement in half a year. Tanisha had redirected Gloria's pension deposits, changed the passwords, and told Derek a story about his mother hiding money from the family. The verbal abuse came next. Small things at first. Sighing loudly when Gloria spoke, correcting her in front of company, calling her forgetful, then confused, then unstable. Building a case, brick by brick, that this woman whose hands had scrubbed hospital linens for 15 years to give her son a life was now a burden who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. And Derek believed every word of it. He started avoiding his mother. Then he started repeating Tanisha's language back at Gloria, calling her dramatic, sensitive, difficult. By the time he raised his hand to her the first time, 6 months before she appeared on my porch, he'd been so thoroughly reshaped by that woman that he didn't even seem to recognize what he'd become. I didn't know any of this when Gloria knocked. I learned it in pieces, sitting across from her at my kitchen table while she held a cup of coffee she never drank and talked to the floor. She told me about the bruises she explained away at her doctor's office, about little Maya, Derek's daughter from a relationship before Tamisha, who was 7 years old and living in that house like a ghost, invisible, unwanted, fed last, given the smallest portion, never allowed to sit on the good furniture or use the nice bathroom. She told me about the night Derek threw her against the hallway wall because she'd asked Tanisha to please not use her good cast iron pan for frying fish. That was the night she packed the grocery bag. I walked her to my guest room and watched her lie down on top of the covers, fully dressed, still clutching that bag. She was asleep in seconds. The sleep of someone whose body had been running on adrenaline for months. I sat in my armchair and I did not sleep at all. By morning, I had a plan. Gloria and I don't look enough alike to fool anyone up close. But Tanisha, Yvonne, and Deshaun had never once come to a family gathering in 2 years. They'd kept Gloria isolated so completely that her own family hadn't laid eyes on those 3 people in person. I'd seen one photo of Tanisha at the wedding. Yvonne and Deshaun I'd never seen at all. I was a retired sheriff's deputy. I knew how to read a room. I knew how to become whoever a room needed me to be. I told Gloria I was going to go check on the house. She asked me not to. I told her I was going anyway. She grabbed my wrist and said, "Raymond, these are not reasonable people." I looked at her and said, "Neither am I." I drove to Decatur in Gloria's old Buick, using her spare key. I wore work clothes, a gray collared shirt, dark pants, reading glasses I didn't need. I carried a clipboard. The clipboard was my own addition. People stopped questioning a man with a clipboard. Number 4 Maple Creek Drive looked like a slow collapse. The garden Gloria had kept for 20 years was overgrown, the blue shutters sagging where screws had loosened and nobody had bothered to tighten them. 3 cars in the driveway, a child's bicycle on its side in the grass, one wheel bent, abandoned. I let myself in through the back door with Gloria's key. The kitchen smelled like old grease and someone's perfume layered over it. Dishes stacked in the sink. The cast iron pan Gloria had mentioned sitting on the stove with grease-dried black along the edges. Then I heard her. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book and 4 broken crayons. She was small for 7, wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big, her braids coming undone on one side. She colored with the focused intensity of a child who had learned to be very quiet and very still. When she looked up and saw me, she didn't move. She watched me the way animals watch strangers, assessing threat before anything else. That assessment, in a 7-year-old child, told me everything I needed to know about what daily life in this house had taught her. "Hey there," I said softly, staying near the door. "I'm a friend of your grandmother's." She tilted her head. "Grandma Gloria," she whispered, like the name was something she wasn't sure she was allowed to say out loud. "That's right." She looked at the coloring book, then back at me. "Is she coming home?" I kept my voice even. "I'm working on that." A door opened down the hall and Yvonne materialized in a kitchen doorway like something conjured by a bad mood. She was a large woman in her mid-50s, wearing house slippers and a bathrobe even at 11 in the morning, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She looked at me with the flat suspicion of someone who considered all visitors intrusions. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Raymond Briggs," I said, holding up the clipboard. "Property management company. We have been receiving some code compliance concerns about this address. Need to do a walkthrough." Yvonne crossed her arms. "Nobody called about any walkthrough." "It's a standard follow-up," I said pleasantly. "Won't take long. I can come back with a formal notice if you prefer. Usually takes about 3 weeks to reschedule." She looked at the clipboard, then at me, then at her slippers. The calculation behind her eyes was visible. "Come back in an hour," she said. "My daughter's still sleeping." "I'll wait outside," I said. I went back to the car and I waited exactly 45 minutes. When I knocked on the front door this time, Tanisha answered. I had expected someone intimidating. What I found was a woman of 34 in a good silk blouse and gold earrings who looked like she'd been pretty before meanness settled into the lines of her face. She was sharp-eyed, well put together, and she looked at me the way people look at something they believe they can dismiss. A 67-year-old man with a clipboard. No threat. That was her mistake. I gave her the property management story again, walked through 3 rooms making notes on the clipboard, complimented the kitchen layout. By the time I left, I had seen the house, assessed the exits, noted which rooms were occupied, and located where Derek kept his important papers in a filing cabinet in the home office that used to be Gloria's sewing room. Most importantly, I had seen Maya again. She'd moved to the living room couch and was still coloring. When Tanisha walked me past, she didn't look up. When Tanisha turned away for a moment, Maya looked directly at me. I gave her the smallest nod I had. She gave it back. I drove around the corner and called my former partner from the department, a woman named Sergeant Claudette Haynes, now working domestic investigations. I told her what Gloria had told me. I told her about the financial control, the injuries, the child. Claudette listened without interrupting, which is something she'd always been exceptional at. "Raymond," she said when I finished, "you know I need documented evidence and a formal complaint before I can move on any of this." "I know," I said. "Give me a few days." She was quiet for a moment. "Whatever you're thinking about doing," she said carefully, "make sure it's legal." "Mostly," I said. She hung up. I spent the next 48 hours building my case. Gloria sat with me at my kitchen table and walked me through 2 years of financial records she'd managed to photograph on her phone before she left. Pension statements, bank transfers to an account in Tanisha's name, Utility bills paid late while Tanisha's car note was paid on time. I called the property management company that actually held Gloria's mortgage and learned that someone had recently inquired about the process for adding a co-owner's name to a deed. Tanisha had been laying groundwork. She wanted the house. On the third morning, I went back to Maple Creek Drive, not with a clipboard this time. I went as myself, Gloria's brother, come to collect some of her personal belongings she'd left behind. That was the cover story anyway. Yvonne opened the door and her expression told me she remembered my face from 2 days ago. The confusion flickered across her features for just a moment before I smiled and introduced myself as Gloria's brother, and I watched her decide that two men could just happen to look somewhat similar. "You got some nerve showing up here," she said, stepping aside anyway, because barring family members from the house entirely was a step she apparently wasn't ready to justify out loud. "Just here for her things," I said. Tanisha came out of the kitchen drying her hands on a dish towel and stopped when she saw me. Something about my posture, about the stillness of a man who had spent 2 decades walking toward danger instead of away from it, made her hesitate. The silk blouse was gone today, replaced by a t-shirt. She seemed smaller. "What exactly does she need?" Tanisha said. "Some documents. Winter clothes. Her mother's jewelry." "That jewelry is in a safe place," Tanisha said quickly. Too quickly. "I understand," I said pleasantly. "I'll just let her know where it is so she can stop worrying about it." The rest of the morning unfolded in a cold politeness that was really just two people measuring each other. I moved slowly through the house, noting things, staying aware. Derek wasn't home, gone to work at the car shop where he'd been employed for 6 years, largely because his mother had co-signed his first tools. Deshawn was in the back bedroom, gaming, indifferent. Maya sat at the kitchen table again with the coloring book. The same 4 broken crayons. I sat down across from her while Tanisha and Yvonne conferred in low voices in the hallway. "What happened to the rest of your crayons?" I asked quietly. "Caleb broke them," she whispered. That was the name of Yvonne's grandson from another daughter, a 10-year-old who visited on weekends and treated this house and everyone in it as his personal property. He came on Saturdays. It was Thursday. "And nobody got you new ones?" She shook her head without looking up. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a fresh box of 64 Crayola crayons on the table in front of her, the kind with the sharpener built into the back. She looked at that box the way children look at things they want but have learned not to reach for. "Those are yours," I said. "You can take them to your room." She picked them up with both hands and held them against her chest exactly the way Gloria had held that grocery bag. I had to look away. By Friday evening I was back, and this time I had spoken to Claudette again. This time with documentation. She told me she could move quickly if I could get her something concrete, something recorded. She told me she'd been watching a pattern develop in this part of Decatur for years. Financial exploitation of elderly homeowners by relatives, and if I could give her what she needed, she could bring in the full weight of the county. That night, I accepted Tanisha's invitation to stay for dinner. It was the first invitation she'd extended, and the warmth of it told me something had shifted. I'd been in this house enough now that they decided I needed to be managed rather than refused. I was family after all. Harder to simply turn away. And I was clearly not going anywhere. Yvonne had cooked. She set a bowl of beef stew in front of me with a smile that reminded me of every deposition I'd ever sat through where the subject was performing sincerity. I thanked her warmly. I commented on the smell of it. And while Tanisha went to refill her glass of water and Yvonne turned to check something on the stove, I switched my bowl with Deshawn's. He'd stepped away from the table to take a phone call, and his bowl was sitting untouched. Deshawn came back, sat down, and ate his dinner. Nobody said a word. 20 minutes later, he was asleep on the couch with his mouth open, snoring. I looked at Yvonne. I looked at Tanisha. I set my phone on the counter behind a paper towel holder where it had been recording since I walked in. Then I said goodnight, told them I was going to rest in the guest room for a bit, since the drive back was long, and went and lay down fully dressed in the dark. My eyes wide open, every sense tuned to the house around me. I waited. At close to 11:30, I heard it. The whispered conversation from the kitchen. Yvonne's voice low and purposeful. Tanisha's replies, clipped and decisive. Then footsteps, soft and deliberate, heading down the hall. I had spent the previous afternoon in the hardware store buying a very specific doorstop, the kind that wedges so tightly it takes real effort to open from the outside. I'd installed it on the inside of the guest room door before I lay down. I was already out the window before they reached the door. I moved around the outside of the house and came in through the kitchen entrance. I could hear them in the hallway, having discovered the wedged door, now deciding what to do. Yvonne's voice was agitated. Tanisha's was cold and flat in a way that told me she had done difficult things before and had organized herself around the idea that she would do them again. "Just get it open," she said. I stepped into the kitchen and stood at the counter where my phone was still recording. I pressed a button on it that connected the live feed to a cloud account. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the second phone I'd brought for exactly this purpose, opened the camera, and moved to the hallway doorway. What I saw was this. Yvonne was pushing against the guest room door with her shoulder, while Tanisha held a length of plastic zip ties and a roll of duct tape. Behind her, Tashawn stood groggily in the hallway, still half asleep from whatever had been in that stew, clearly recruited from muscle. And I understood then with the clarity that only 22 years of law enforcement can give a person exactly what they had planned to do to whoever they believed was asleep in that room. I stepped fully into the hallway. All three of them turned. Tanisha's expression went through shock, then recalculation, then something else entirely when she looked at what was in my hand. "Good evening," I said, holding up the second phone so they could see the red recording indicator. What followed was not quiet. Yvonne started talking immediately, a flood of explanation and denial and sudden reframing. Tanisha went very still in the way that cold people go. Still when they understand the ground has shifted. Deshawn sat down on the floor in the hallway because his legs appeared to have made a decision without him. I called Claudette. She arrived with two other officers at 12:43 in the morning. The recording captured everything. Yvonne's voice saying we need him gone before he makes trouble. Tanisha's response about the deed inquiry, the zip ties, the duct tape, the plan that had not gone the way they'd intended because the man they thought was helpless had spent 2 decades learning to never be helpless in the situations that counted. Tanisha was arrested. Yvonne was arrested. The financial exploitation charges Claudette had been building toward, combined with what was on those recordings, amounted to something that would take a long time and a good lawyer to navigate out of. Deshawn was not charged. He was 23, groggy, and when Claudette asked him what he understood about what had been planned that night, he started crying in a way that made me believe him when he said he'd had no idea it would go that far. Derek came home to police cars in his driveway. I sat in the living room and waited for him. He walked in still wearing his work shirt, and when he saw me across the room, he stopped. Whatever anger he might have arrived with drained out of him standing in the doorway of the house his mother had bought with 15 years of hospital laundry money, looking at his uncle who had put people in handcuffs for a living, understanding slowly and then all at once what had happened. I didn't speak first. I let him stand there in it. "Your mother is at my house," I said finally. "She's been there for 4 days. He sat down heavily on the couch. The look on his face was not the look of a villain. It was the look of a man who had been told a story about himself for so long that he'd forgotten he had once been someone different. A boy whose mother worked double shifts, who had eaten that woman's cooking every day of his childhood, who she had loved with a fierceness that had cost her years of her body. He had been turned, carefully and deliberately, against the source of everything he'd ever been given. I am not a therapist. I'm not a preacher. I won't tell you I handled that conversation with grace. I told him the truth. Plainly, the financial records, the deed inquiry, what had been planned for me that night in that guest room. I watched his face move through disbelief and then, slowly, into something that looked like grief. "That is your work to do," I told him. "Not mine. But your daughter has been sitting in this kitchen every day with 4 broken crayons, because nobody in this house thought she was worth the attention. That's where you start." He looked at the kitchen table, at the empty spot where the coloring book had been. A week later, Gloria came home, not to stay at first. She came to stand in the garden she hadn't been in for 2 years and look at what had grown and what had died and what could still be saved. She stood in the kitchen doorway and ran her hand along the doorframe, touching her own house, like something she was relearning the shape of. The cast iron pan was still on the stove. She picked it up and washed it. Maya came out of the back bedroom holding the 64 Crayola box. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her grandmother with the cautious hope of a child who has been disappointed enough times to need confirmation that good things are allowed to stay. Gloria crossed the kitchen and knelt down and held her granddaughter for a long time. I stood in the doorway and looked at the garden. Derek is in counseling. He still lives in the house because it is his mother's house, and she has chosen to give him the chance to earn back what was broken, which is her right and her grace to extend, not mine to approve or deny. The financial matters are in the hands of an attorney who Claudette connected Gloria with through a county program for exactly these situations. The deed is Gloria's, fully, cleanly, and what Tanisha attempted to transfer has been reversed. I want to tell you something now, because I've been thinking about it since that night in the hallway, when I watched those women walk toward what they thought was a defenseless old man. There is a story we tell about aging that I have been fighting my whole life, that getting older means getting softer, that time hollows you out, that the men who were once strong become the men who need protecting. I spent 22 years wearing a badge, and I've been retired for 5 years, and I will tell you right now that every day of that retirement, every morning I walked, every evening I read, every year I stayed paying attention, I was becoming something those women had not planned for. Age doesn't make you irrelevant, it makes you patient. And there is nothing in this world more dangerous than a patient man who loves his family. But here is what I also need to say, and this is the part I think about at night. I got there in time. Gloria walked away with a bruise and a grocery bag and enough sense left to come to my door. That is not everyone's story. There are women sitting in houses right now who have nobody to go to, who have been so thoroughly isolated that the idea of reaching out feels more terrifying than staying. And there are men like me who don't know to look because nobody told us, because she never said anything, because the signs were there, we called them something else. So my warning is this: look at the people you love, not the version of them you last saw at Christmas or the image in your phone. Look at them. When did they last call? When did they last seem like themselves? Is there someone new in their life who seems to manage the access? Those are not small questions. I let 2 years go by. I tell myself the situation was complicated. The estrangement felt real at the time, and those things are true. But the bruise on my sister's cheek was also real, and it had been happening long before she showed up on my porch. Don't wait for them to come to your door. Go to theirs. Every family has a Gloria, someone quiet, someone who absorbs difficulty, someone who taught themselves long ago that being a burden was the worst thing they could be. And every Gloria deserves somebody who shows up before the grocery bag. I pray you are that person for someone. I pray someone is that person for you. If this story made you think of someone you haven't checked on in a while, put down whatever you're doing and reach out to them today, not tomorrow, today. And tell me in the comments, was there ever a time someone showed up for you when you needed it most? I want to hear it. Every voice matters here. This is Voices of Uncle Raymond. Thank you for being here. Please share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. We'll see you in the next one.